On this video I'm taking a look at Alma Mater or Alma Mater from the same team who brought you Coimbra. Is it a direct sequel? Does it bear any resemblance at all? Is it a game in its own right? But more importantly, is it fun? Let's find out. Hello, I'm Luke Hector from the Broken Meeple, and if you're new to this channel then stay tuned for more content because this is where you can find out about board games, top 10s, solo plays, and of course the people who enjoy the hobby. And if the game I'm reviewing today takes your fancy, then consider getting it from zatu.co.uk where you can use my code TBMeeple5 in the corner to get 5% off your entire basket of games. Check out the website and see if there's a space on your shelf that needs filling. Yes, I make fun of the pronunciation on a lot of games, but no, this one is pronounced Alma Mater. It means the school or university that someone went to. And this is from the same team who brought you the very popular Euro game, Coimbra. In my collection, it still does well. It's not my top 100, shall we say, but certainly in my top 150, and I enjoy this one quite a bit with its unique card mechanic and its interesting, if slightly garish, art style. Well, Alma Mater uses the exact same team. We've got the same designers, we've got the same publisher, we've got the same artist even, but get it clear now, this is not a direct sequel to Coimbra. The two games are very different in how they operate. Literally the only thing that will spark any kind of resemblance is the art style, where one looks very much like the other. Alma Mater is a heavy worker placement game where you are seeking to have the most prestigious university out of all the other players. To do so, you need students to come to your university, you need to hire professors to work at the university, and of course you need to keep your finances in check. But as well as money, you also have to contend with a second currency in the game, namely the books, whether it's your colour books or other players or the yellow dictionaries which are harder to get. These books are used as another form of currency in order to acquire the students, the professors, but also to progress up a research track. The research track not only gets you some bonuses if you can get high enough, but it also determines the value of the books when it comes to hiring other students. Different students have different costs for books, and the books are separated into different tiers. The tiers are determined by who is highest up the research track. So namely, if you want some of the more point-giving students in the fray, then you need to acquire books from tier 1, which may belong to player B, player C, player D, for example, depending on who's higher up the research track. To get professors, you need to spend books of a variety of different colours, but the price is determined by you when you first buy a university professor. So the first cost, for example, may be 3 red, 2 green, 1 blue, and 1 yellow book. You have to spend a certain number of each type of book, but the first person to grab a professor determines which books in which quantity. And then for players to get the professor subsequently, they have to pay the exact cost in books. Money is obtained by various means, but with this cash you can go buy books from other players. It's easier to get your own colour book, but as I said, you need a variety of books. So in order to get them from other players, the primary way to do this is to buy them direct. You can have books in your library to gain you income at the end of each round, but usually what will happen is another player will come and buy your books off you. The money they pay goes straight to you though. So they get the books, you get the income to spend. So there's a balancing act as to whether you should pay somebody all that money in order to get the books, or whether you should try and acquire it by other means or find some alternative plan of action. The game progresses through several rounds, at which point there is a lengthy scoring phase, and then of course, the person with the most, have a guess.
Of course!
D for duration, how long is the game and does it outstay its welcome? Well, the previous Coimbra could manage about 90 minutes, 2 hours max. With Alma Mater, you essentially are talking anywhere between 90 minutes to 2.5 hours typically. I've yet to have a game actually reach 3 hours, other than the very first game where I was teaching 3 new players and even I was new to the rules of the game, and that was like a complete one-off. Since then, the maximum time it's taken is about 2.5 hours, whether it's because I've been more familiar with the teaching or the players have just gotten more familiar with the game and they can progress through their turns quicker. Not to say that there isn't certainly an amount of AP that can be generated through this game, because it is quite meaty and it's certainly quite unforgiving as well, so you don't want to rush through the game too much, but all in all it wasn't too bad a length for the amount of actions and the amount of, shall we say, like thinking that you are going to have to do. But if anything does take a while to do in this game, it's the setup. The setup, despite an insert which is for the most part good, more on that later, it does take a while to actually get the game going. You've got to grab a lot of stuff out of that insert and put them in certain piles, and depending on the player count, you might only have to use so many of them. You've got professors, of which you've got to select so many out of so many categories. You've got chancellors you've got to deal out player abilities from. You've got these bust cards, which are the statue heads essentially, that you have to separate out. You've got the research cards, where you've got to go, right, I need an A, I need a B, I need a C, I need a D, and that. You've got all of that before you even start dishing out people's money and books for their currency. Oh, did I mention player boards and a lot of other stuff as well? It's like there's a fair amount to do, and then you get to the teaching aspect, which can take a fair while as well. So why don't we segue nicely into ease of play? Is the game easy to grok? Is it challenging? Is it quite complex? Well, the rulebook actually does a reasonable job of explaining the rules. I have to admit, I was kind of freaked out when I saw this at first because I thought, oh, this is going to be pretty complex and that. But no, the rulebook has a lot of pictorial examples in it. It's laid out pretty well. It has a lot of kind of iconography explained during it. And I must admit, it's a pretty decent one to go by. It gives you a paragraph explaining the rule and then gives you a fairly lengthy bit of example 1. Of turn order, and it's an example for pretty much everything. In fact, there's very few things in this rulebook that isn't explained by way of an example or pictorial representation, so kudos for that. And the appendix at the back is about 6-7 pages long, full of the professors and students' abilities. But that's where things get a little bit more ropey, because there is a lot of iconography in this game. It's pretty much language independent, apart from a few little instances on some of the Chancellor abilities, but the professors, the students, everything else is pretty much done by iconography. The problem is, there's a lot of it, and it's not particularly intuitive. There's a lot of times when you look at something and go, what does that mean? How does that work? And it means you've got to rules check this on a regular basis.
I don't get it.
Which can get a little bit frustrating during the game. And this will also add to the teaching time, because bear in mind, you're going to have all these students on the board, like 16 of them, and 8 different professors, and the Chancellor ability, and the bust cards. Is that there's going to be a few things on the board with icons and all the research costs. Oh yeah, I forgot about them. You're probably going to have to spend a fair while explaining to all the players what each and every one of them does, because chances are a good at least 50% of the iconography in this game you're not going to be able to just guess at a moment's notice, and that can make the ease of play a little bit high on the barrier to entry front. But it's not to say that it's like ridiculously complex or like, oh my god, it's burning my brain, I can't possibly understand this game. No, and a lot of that is down to the aforementioned really good rulebook. But you are going to have to get very comfortable with iconography before setting foot in this game, because otherwise it could be quite a struggle. So moving on to T for tactics and strategy. Is the game engaging? Is it challenging? Is your brain going to melt at times? Yes, yes, and yes. This game definitely has a high point when it comes to this topic area, and a lot of that is down to the fact that it's very deceptively tight. You look at the board and you think, oh, I just need some books for a student, that's easy enough. Oh, I just need to spend a variety of books for the professors, easy enough. And there's the cost for the research. Okay, it's going to be a little bit tight, but not too bad. Not until you actually set foot in this game properly do you realise just how tight everything is. Although we are not talking stupid levels of tight. We're not talking Cooper Island levels of tight. In fact, I don't even know why I'm looking over there. I got it out of the collection. But yeah, it's one of those things where you get into it and think, yeah, I'm okay. Poof. Hey, what? Hey, what's going on? And it hits you in the face and you realise, I've got very little books around. I've got very little money. Everything's, I can't afford anything. And this can be a little bit of a negative in your first game, because you can easily like rope yourself into a corner where you just feel like you can't do anything, and it's not particularly fun when you've only got about 6 or so rounds in the game. I think it's 6 or 7 in order to actually do things, and then you spend half a round going, well, I couldn't really do a lot with my guys apart from just collect a bit of money. I mean, that was a bit lame. And you really do need to be paying attention. You really do need to think ahead. It definitely requires forward planning. Of course, when you actually do have a plan that comes together nicely, it feels very rewarding. It's easier said than done, however, but if you do get a nice little engine going via a mix of students and professors, or maybe a focus on each, or maybe you did so well in the research that your books are sought after by other players, then yeah, it's a pretty good feeling once it happens. However, that does sometimes mean that you can end up with a minor runaway leader issue, in the sense that if one person is clearly doing well from the offset and one person is clearly doing badly from the offset, there's not a lot of time for that person to catch up.
Wingardium Leviosa.
But we've seen worker placement before, we've seen professors with special abilities before, we've seen player powers before. This is nothing new. But here's the unique selling point, the book currency. It creates a level of interaction unseen in a lot of Euro games. Most Euro games literally just have, oh, I block you off the space and I make life harder for you. Well, that's still present in this game, but the books, it's a very cool system, and it's pretty much what makes Alma Mater. You have the ability to buy books from other players, but the value of the books is determined by the tier system on the research track. So if you're always the highest on the research track, your books are in tier 1, which means that to get the students, which for the later parts need tier 1, if not tier 1 and 2 books, then people want to buy your books. So you have some on offer on your player board, which get you income each round, but it's 1 coin per book. It's not something you want to rely on too much. Ideally, you want players to come and buy them off you, because if they do, they pay you the price on your player board and you get the money. So you have this level of interaction where players are kind of trying to goad you into buying their books, or you're considering whether I should give money to another player, because of course you're getting the books to help yourself, but then you're also giving them a cash flow increase. So suddenly you're probably helping them to do what they need to do. It's a great dynamic. It's probably the best thing in this game. However, there is a little bit of a caveat with that though. The research track itself, it's cool, it's variable, and it's, you know, it's one of those things you really should aim for. It can get you some bonuses, it might qualify for endgame scoring, whatever. But if you do not focus on that research track, and I mean you just casually sit by and do nothing with the research track, be prepared to lose most of the time. If you, well, when I say lose, just don't expect to win if you do that, because the research track is paramount. You need to at least be in those upper couple of players doing well on it, because tier 1 and tier 2 books are needed for students. If your book is never in there, then your books aren't going to be bought as often as somebody else. So somebody else could just be pumping out books and everybody wants to buy them, they get the money from them, great. But then your books don't get bought often enough, which means you don't get enough money, which means you can't do a lot of actions. It's okay occasionally to ignore research, but you need to have the perfect selection of teachers and students in order to have an engine that can work without it. But in all the games I have played, all the games that have been won, they've always been by somebody who has done as either maxed out research or been in that upper echelon. Anytime somebody has ignored research or perpetually been in the bottom level of it, has lost or just not won. And that is kind of a bit annoying, because it means that it creates a kind of linear path that everybody must follow. You know, whether you go full students, full professors, or a mix of both, which is essentially your free path to victory, you need to do well on the research. You can't just do it and ignore it. And I wish that maybe there wasn't so much reliance on it, but hey ho, it's a heavy Euro game, you kind of expect one thing to be a crutch. So A, for aesthetics, does the game look good? Is it colourful? Is the graphic design easy to read? Well, that depends on whether you liked Coimbra or not. Coimbra and Alma Mater share the same artist, so they have the same style of graphic design and colour. Personally, I really like it. It's certainly unique, and it's not going to be for everybody, but then the same applies to something like, say, Dinosaur Island, which is probably the closest thing I can compare it to. But it's very colourful, very bright, everything stands out, everything's clearly set out. Like, I know that's research, I know that's this campus, I know that's the professor thing. It's not like it all blends together like, say, Lisboa, for example, where a lot of the areas on that board kind of like, hang on, is that part of that? Is that part of that? Ooh, I'm not entirely sure. Looks gorgeous, but you gotta admit, it's pretty hard to see what everything is on the board. Here though, not a problem. And the graphic design is simplicity itself. Any iconography that you have is big, it's easy to read, it's clearly distinguished from others. There's no like, hang on, that yellow is a bit hard to read, what does that mean? No, all the iconography is clear to read. You just have to look in the book a lot of times in order to figure out what half of it means, but, you know, it's one of those little annoyances that you got to deal with. But overall, I think this is well produced from an artistry perspective. When it comes to components though, whew, this is definitely well produced. You've got good thick tiles, you've got cards which are kind of plasticky in feel, but at least you don't feel you have to like sleeve them anytime soon. You've got reasonably thick cardboard coins, you know, it all looks very nice on the table. But the books.
You good looking.
The books are gonna turn heads. This isn't quite Seasons Dice level of fangirlism here, but yeah, these books are nice. They are kind of like these resiny plastic, like chunky book Meeples. It's like something you would get out of the Stonemaier treasure chests, you know, those resin resources. Maybe not quite as realistic looking, but it's something that I would happily see in one of those chests. You've got a lot of them, you've got books for all the different players and the yellow books for the dictionaries, and they just look good. I mean, it is satisfying to hold them, it's satisfying to spend them as currency, they stay on your professors as costs, they go on the board. You do a lot with these books, and it's just like, I can tell where half the budget went. It went into producing those. I for Immersion, is the theme strong? Is it engaging? Is it immersive? Not entirely. And this is a slight disappointment, but I kind of expected this going in, because as soon as I realised, oh, this is possibly a sequel to Coimbra. Yeah, Coimbra didn't really have a theme either, did it? Nor does this one. Yeah, you're exchanging books, but it could be any type of currency. Yeah, you're getting students and it's a research track, but the research track is literally just a massive track full of costs. And the costs don't really tell you what they relate to, it doesn't tell you what you're researching, and the costs are just random. You know, one card at the start might be very money intensive, and then the next one is based on whether you've got a lot of professors or not, and it's like, well, where's the correlation? There isn't really one. You don't feel like the students are anything distinguished either, it's just a special ability. You've got 4 different faculties, the arts, the laws, and the math students, but it makes no difference. It's literally just a category of students. It's not like the art students give you stuff related to art topics or anything like that, or, you know, it just kind of assumes that, oh yeah, the math students give you the points and the art students give you a few other abilities, and it's just like, I would have liked for a bit more theme in this game, you know, or at least to make the theme stronger. The setting is alright. I like the idea of making up a university and having students and professors. It makes a change from medieval village, although annoyingly, I still can't escape the church in this game. There's a bishop space that you put meeples on for turn order and money, and it's like, what is it about these Euro games set in the past where everything has to appease a church in some form or another? Okay, you don't have to appease the bishop, but the bishop is there. Of course, that does work from a theme perspective. I am aware that in the old days in universities they would have their own sort of purpose-built chapel and that, so it makes sense. But for crying out loud, can I please get away from bishops and the church in these old Euro games? It's a personal gripe and it's not going to affect the rating, but I just had to kind of mention it for giggles. And finally, L for longevity. Is there a lot of paths to victory? Is there good variation? Does it have a solo mode? Well, no to the latter. There's no solo mode in this, unfortunately, which is a bit of a shame because you'd think they probably could have worked in some way to have an AI. In terms of player count, it plays fine at 2, 3 and 4 players, although the sweet spot is definitely 3. 4 is good in the sense that you have a lot of different tier books and plenty of interaction, but it does take the game length to the upper echelon in terms of AP and just like getting the game moving forward. Whereas with 2 players, you have this weird bot player that plays a role, and that's okay, but it is nowhere near as fun or as like interactive as having 3 human players. It's like the 2 player and the bot is not really the reason you should buy this game. You're really buying this for 3 and 4 players, and ideally keep it around 3, which does make it a little bit restrictive. But like I say, it's not that 4 is bad. I will play this with 4. I just know it's probably going to be my one game of the night if I do that. In terms of the variety between games, that's hit and miss. There is some good variety in places, and then in other places there's no variety. The research track is very variable. There's like 5 different cards you put out, 1 for each letter, and there's several in each letter. So the research track's going to be fundamentally different every game. But at the end of the day, it's just a bunch of costs. I mean, it may change the dynamic of the game slightly, but it's not the biggest variation you could get. With the professors, you've got 2 professors and 4 different faculties, and there's 4 available for each faculty, and you pick 2. Not bad, but I would have liked maybe more professors. I mean, would it have hurt maybe to have had 6 or 8 professors in each faculty and you use 2? Because that could create some really good variety. In terms of the Chancellors, there's a decent amount of them for very different player abilities, and they are very different. There's some interesting and very powerful abilities there. And if you are not using your Chancellor ability to its full effect during the game, then be prepared to lose. But here's where the problem in the variety lies. The students. There is not enough of them. There's 16 students, and you might think, well, that's quite a lot, isn't it? No, not quite. Because all of them are used in every game. There's 4 faculties, 4 students in each. And the latter faculty, the law faculty, it's either law or maths, I can't remember, but they are just point scoring. Score points for this, score points for that, score points for that. So they're in every single game, so you know that you can get points for those. And the rest are different abilities. And some of them just give you instant points with a minor ability, and the others are just giving you an ability. And it's not to say that the students are bad, although the one I mentioned that you can't figure out the rules to, nobody buys that in any game. But the problem is, why is there not more students? Could we have not had, similar to the professors, maybe 6 students for each faculty, and then you picked 4, so occasionally a certain student wouldn't be there? Why was that a problem? And I'll tell you why. Because I've looked on Board Game Geek and there's a mini expansion for this game that introduces more students, all for the low price of something extortionate.
Cash grab!
If it's anything like the Coimbra mini expansion, which was a complete rip-off, then I'm expecting the same for this. It's one of those things where it's like, no, come on. You're giving us a mini expansion with a little few amount of students. Why weren't they in their base game? The only reason I can think of is cha-ching, but you know, I'm gonna like cause controversy or anything like that, but it just seems a little bit weird that you got a little bit of variation in the other bits, and then for the students they just conveniently didn't. You know, I would have certainly liked to have seen more there. So my final word on Alma Mater is that this is another entertaining Euro game from the same team that brought you Coimbra. If you were to ask me to compare the two, I'd probably pick Coimbra, but again, these are very different games in terms of play. Each category I've mentioned has a lot of good points to talk about, but also the odd negative here and there. This is definitely a very tight and punishing Euro, and it's certainly on that bar line of how tight and punishing I want a game to be, but this is going to appease to a lot of people, and I can certainly see a lot of the merits in this game. It's got a reasonable amount of variety, but again, some knocks here and there. The complexity of the iconography is certainly going to make learning the game a bit of a chore for some people, particularly in regards to that one student that's like, okay, this doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And of course, the interactive nature of the books is definitely the high point, but then you have the problem that it kind of makes research a mandatory thing to aim for in a game, and I wished it didn't quite. But it is an entertaining play despite the flaws that I have mentioned. So it is going to sit on my shelf for the time being. I'm going to see how long it lasts in the collection. But I'm going to give Alma Mater a very high 7 out of 10. It's definitely one that I'll enjoy playing. I just might prefer some other games in favour of it. But it's got a very unique system with those books, and it's definitely the bit I look most forward to. I just wish that it sort of upped the variety in some places, didn't make the research path such a linear thing that you must do every game in order to do particularly well, and the complexity of the iconography, it does grate on you after a while with new players to have to go, right, okay, this icon means this icon means that, this icon means that. It's like, yes, you've got an appendix in the book, but maybe they could have just made it a little bit more user-friendly in that regard. That being said, still a fun game, still in the collection, we'll just see how long it lasts. Now I hope you've enjoyed the content on the Broken Meeple, but as I say, I'm not the only creator out there. There's plenty of smaller creators who need your support, yet give a constructive opinion on games as well. So why didn't you check out this channel after you're done with this?
Hello, my name is Alex and I run a small board gaming channel called Gems Biscuits. Being very much a newcomer to the scene, and not just YouTube but board gaming in general, the channel offers reviews, top 10s and vlog videos from the perspective of someone who's only been into the hobby for just over a year. I will cover the latest hotness whenever I can get my hands on it, but just as much I want to talk about the slightly older games that get me excited about being part of the hobby. In my reviews, I will not be spending a lot of time talking about the rules, as personally I find it much more interesting to know what it feels like to play the game and what sort of experience you're likely to walk away with in the end. So, having said all that, welcome to Gems and Biscuits. I hope you'll join me on this journey as I continue discovering the wonderful world of board games.
So that's it for me on this episode of The Broken Meeple. If you've earned your subscription, hit the avatar button to subscribe and hit the bell for future notifications because of the dumb YouTube system. Until next time, you can check out my most recent upload or check out a personal recommendation by me. Until next time, remember as always, it's only a game. Bye for now.